Hey everybody, on behalf of the Hydrologic Student Subcommittee, part of AGU, my name is Tom Glose. I'm a postdoc at the Kansas Geological Survey. Me and my colleague Danyka Byrnes are part of the development group at H3S. We'd like to thank you guys for showing up to this. Danyka, you have anything to add?
No, welcome everyone. Thanks for attending. As Tom said, I'm the kind of co-team with the H3S. So welcome and be put together.
All right, I'm going to introduce our panelists today. We've got Dr. Barret Kurylyk, Dr. Holly Michael, and Dr. Yu-Feng Lin. Do you guys want to go through and introduce yourselves a little bit further?
Sure, I can start as the junior member. So yeah, my name is Barret Kurylyk. I'm an assistant prof at Dalhousie University, which is in Nova Scotia. So that's the southeast corner of Canada, effectively. And I also hold Canada Research Chair in Coastal Water Resources. I came from the East Coast and I went to Ontario for a bit and then out to the Rockies, and I'm really excited to be back on the coast in Atlantic Canada. I love the opportunity working in coastal settings. So we've launched a lab there in the last 3 years. And we're growing quickly, and we have a lot of projects that range in geography from the Bay of Fundy, so mega tidal settings, all the way up to permafrost settings in the north. And also associate editor for Water Resources Research and Hydrogeology Journal, which I guess is partly why I'm involved in this today. And I think this is a really critical topic, and I'm excited that CUAHSI and the AGU H3S has identified this is something they want to highlight in their Cyberseminar series, and I want to thank them for the invitation to come today and talk remotely.
I can go.
You want to go?
Second. What's that?
Oh, I said you want to go.
Okay. I'm Holly Michael. I'm at the University of Delaware in the departments of Earth Sciences and Civil and Environmental Engineering, and I'm also an associate director of our Environmental Institute. I am an associate editor of WRR and a past associate editor of Hydrogeology Journal, so Barret and I overlap a little in that realm. And yeah, I agree that this is a really important topic and one that can be exceptionally frustrating as a student, postdoc, and young investigator. And so I look forward to discussing this with you, and thank you all for inviting me.
Hi everyone, my name is Yu-Feng, and I'm from University of Illinois. And my main position is Principal Research Hydrogeologist at Illinois State Geological Survey. And also I'm the Director of Illinois Water Resource Center, and which is a national program and managed by USGS. And also I think my main capacity to be here today is as the executive editor of Groundwater. And so, as you know, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a hydrogeologist. So I was trained as a groundwater modeler. And my background also got a civil engineering background also. And I start kind of reviewing manuscripts since 2002, as soon as I got my PhD degree from University of Wisconsin-Madison. And during the course of all those years, I really enjoyed this whole process because, I mean, that's all the learning opportunity for me to review people's work. And there's a lot of doubt myself at that time, and I really appreciate this opportunity that I can share my experience, no matter good or bad, and or ugly, on that. And I think this is a really good platform that we can share of our experience, our thought with our colleagues right now, and also our future generation. And especially, I told the editor-in-chief and then all other senior, some other senior editors that I got opportunity here today, and they all got excited too. And they provide me some information to share with everybody. So just that, I just want to let everybody know it's not just 3 of us or 5 of us really excited. I mean, a lot of also senior editors are very happy to have AGU and CUAHSI host these platform and this discussion. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks guys. So prior to this webinar, we solicited some questions from the hydrologic community. Danyka and I have gone through and kind of distilled those down to like the base level. So if anyone has anything additional to add or a follow-up question to ask any of the panelists, please use the Q&A box, and Danyka and I will go through and triage those and ask them as they come up. So for the first question, I'm going to start with Holly Michael, and then we'll go through the panel. First question that we received, and we received a lot of this one, was do you have a specific process when you are reviewing manuscripts? And if so, can you walk us through your approach?
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know that my process is particularly special. I mean, I usually will read the paper first before I make any judgments or write anything down. And then I will either read it a second time or start to jot down some notes once I'm all the way through it. And so typically the review involves a summary paragraph or 2 about what the work is, what its contribution is, a summary of what my major criticisms might be, or, and also how I think that it could contribute, and or how it could be improved in order to make specific contributions. And then I usually have major comments that I think really need to be addressed well, and then minor comments, which are sometimes editorial or smaller in nature. And then once I have an outline of those major things that I want to talk about, that I want to write about, I usually go through again and make sure that I'm not off base on any of them. And I also take a second look to see, am I going overboard on anything? Because I try to make sure that my review is, well, one, that it's constructive, but also that I'm not trying to put in my own preferences in terms of style and things like that, that I'm really just trying to help improve this manuscript as it is. So I think that's typically my process.
Great, thanks. Barret, do you want to follow up with that?
Yeah, sure. I think I follow a pretty similar pattern to Holly in terms of the sequence. I would say one thing that's really obvious to me is that people use very different patterns or processes to review a paper. So I remember seeing a very well-respected, internationally renowned hydrologist say that they review papers in half an hour. And then other people take a full day. So obviously with that great difference in time, people approach it differently. The one thing I might add to what Holly said is I really like to figure out when I'm going through a paper pretty early on kind of where it is in the quality spectrum, regardless of what topic it's on. So I'll look into the introduction and really see if they've set the stage well, convincingly, for why the topic's important and why there's existing gaps and why their study fills that gap. And I feel like if they've done that, then a lot of the rest of the way I read it is just thinking about ways to improve it rather than to screen it for maybe rejection. So I try to figure out where they are in that continuum early on in the paper. Maybe I do that too soon, but that's the one different thing I would add.
Yu-Feng, anything else to add?
Yeah, I just post a link on the chat. So I assume the chat is going to everybody's view on that. So on these questions, and I also like to urge all of our young scientists and to check the paper you are going to review, or even some of the journal you are interested, because those journals, they provide a guideline on how you review it and what's your review content supposed to be on each individual journal. But a lot of them have a very similar format and very good guideline there. And I think that would be really some kind of the handbook or the guideline for our young scientists to follow. And not just following on that, because there's a reason for that kind of step on that. So for example, on this document, the bottom of the document I want to mention is we encourage the scientists put their name on that. Because you spend your time to review this, and you should take a credit, and also that a community that people know your work on that, and also you put a stamp on it, and then you have ownership on it. So what I'm saying is that it seems a little bit different on what we just heard there. I think it's the mindset, the concept when you review your process. The first is what do you have in your concept, in your mind? Why are you doing this? You are doing this just provide a comment? No, I think it's much more than that. You are creating a two-way street to communicate with the community. It seems we have a very big community, but if you have been in this field for a while, you will realize it's pretty small. And pretty soon, everybody knows everybody very soon on that. And also for our young scientists, when you want to review how do you process this, of course, I mean, everybody's style is different. And you're going to read a paper on the way you are used to be. Some people go to conclusion first. Some people go to the figures table first. You know, I don't think there's a universal way of doing that. But what Barret and Holly said there, I totally agree on that. Everybody could spend different time on that, but still, I think that one universal thing is the mindset. Why are you reviewing this paper? And the huge benefit for young scientists is also during this communication that brought up your network for kind of collaboration. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Moving on to the next question. Barret, do you have any insights or tips or tricks that you've learned throughout your academic career that helps you review manuscripts? Anything that you do that you've picked up along the way that's made the review process easier for you?
Did you say my name, Tom? I think you did. Well, I'd say one thing that people do poorly is review from a selfish perspective. So what a lot of people, so think of this as a tip of what not to do, I guess. A lot of people read a paper and they look for ways to have that paper reconfigured to make their work look better. So they get really defensive of anything that criticizes something similar to their work, or they want to inject a whole bunch of more citations to their work. So reviewers will recommend a whole bunch of their own papers. And I think we've all done that at some level. And there's nothing wrong with doing that if that citation makes sense or is missing and it's key. But we got to be careful, I think, when we review manuscripts, that we're not doing it to try to make ourselves look better. We're trying to make the author's work better, or perhaps screen it if it's wrong for some reason, or plagiarized or unethical, or something's wrong with it. So when we're trying to improve a paper, I think one thing that students, early career researchers, don't do well in general, it's not a universal rule, is they tend to focus on details like a sentence they don't agree with or a comma that's missing, instead of really sitting back and looking at the whole manuscript and the structure of it and seeing if the sections flow well together and make sense, to see if the section headings make sense, do the titles make sense, do the figures and text kind of talk to each other the way they should. So if you can really adopt that big picture mindset when you're reviewing, and think about how to improve the broad story, not just these details, I think that's a good way to approach reviewing that's really constructive and helpful.
Great, thanks. Yu-Feng, do you want to follow up with anything?
I think that those are very great tips. And one of the tricks maybe I can share is, over a year, I found a great value of reference section there. So a lot of our young scientists probably didn't think about, well, what's a big deal? Reference, yeah, because I have to put in there. But when you review people's paper, actually reference told a lot of story in there, especially when you just want to start it. And that list give you a pretty good sense on what kind of previous work they have seen and needed for you to read this paper. And so that also can give you really kind of one minute quick review on is this really your field or not on that. So what I want to say is don't ignore the power of reference there. And then also when you review this, maybe there was some paper you didn't know and really great there, and that reference list really is a quick shortcut for you to see that. So that's one of the tricks I learned over the years. I want to share.
And I can just follow up with one quick comment on along the lines of what not to do. Something I have been the recipient of and also seen as an associate editor are comments that have a personal tone to them. So for example, one example is this author clearly doesn't have a lot of experience in modeling because of XYZ. So to me, that's inappropriate, right? Your review shouldn't be a commentary on whether the authors are qualified to be writing this paper, but rather the actual science and the merit of the science, and as a reviewer trying to be constructive in improving that. So so that's something that I would just suggest being aware of and making sure that you're talking about the manuscript in front of you and not the authors.
Those are great insights to help anyone starting out to review. Hey, Ali, how do you, as you're an advisor and a mentor, how do you prepare your students for reviewing manuscripts, and how can students approach their advisors about opportunities to review a paper for the first time?
Who was that to, Tom?
To you. Sorry, there's a thunderstorm in Kansas right now, so it's a little bit loud where I am.
Oh, it's okay. No, it's just, yeah, that's a great question. So the first part was, how do you involve your students? Is that what you said? Or how do you mentor your students to do reviews? Yeah. Okay. So I try to involve my students in reviews that I get. So senior PhD students is typically, well, after you've been working for a couple of years and, have expertise, I try to start having students work with me on the reviews. And so if I get one that, I think a student would be a good reviewer for, I'll contact the editor and say, is it okay with you if I co-review this along with my student, and then we work together on it, and then come up with a review. And so I think that's a good way to start, because then the student doesn't feel the pressure of, how do I do this, and worrying about it. Another way that I've done it is, if I don't have time, or if I get something to review, I suggest my student as a reviewer, but then I tell the student and also the editor that I can review it once they're finished and just give some feedback. So I've done that before as well. And the good thing about doing that, and as an advisor, referring journals to ask your students, is that then they're in the database, and so then they come up when the associate editors are looking for reviewers on a certain topic, and then it also shows up that you've reviewed before for the journal, and so that gets you then to the process of being selected as a reviewer on your own. So I think that's a really important aspect. Yeah. There was something I was going to say. Oh, another thing that I do is I incorporate article reviewing into my classes, or I try to. So I'll have the students as an assignment write a review of a paper that already exists, or sometimes a paper that has a comment written on it, to see how their comments might compare to others who have published a comment. And so that's another way to start to practice doing reviews as a student. But I would also, I would definitely, for the students who want to review and who feel like you haven't been giving the opportunity, definitely mention it to your advisor, because sometimes we're just so busy we don't think about, yeah, this would be a great opportunity for my students. So if you say, hey, I'd really like to understand more about this process and maybe work with you, then I expect that they would be really open to that.
Great. Yu-Feng, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, totally agree on that. And actually, I got this question a lot about student review on this. And the quick answer really, well, talk to your editor too. I mean, that's why editor is there. And any suggestion, editors have suggestions, because that's how make the journal, make community better. And that's the whole purpose of peer reviewing process, is to make the whole community better. So I also think that's a really great opportunity for students to learn once they have a mutual agreement on how that student review on this. And there are several approaches, but I think the most benefit is use this opportunity to educate students on the ethic issues on that. So when you review a paper, you got new idea, because you are reviewing a paper which is not publishing yet. So it's just like, and in your field, that's what you really want to do. So it's kind of, you are watching the pre-release version of your favorite movie, you know, Harry Potter or Star Wars, whatever, before everybody else, right? So that's a great, that's exciting, but don't get overexcited and copy paste on that great sentence into your thesis, okay? So I think this is also a great opportunity for professors to educate their student on what's ethical and what's not ethical. And to enhance your idea, to enhance your thinking, that's great. That's what this review about. But copy and paste, definitely no, you know. And so I will encourage you as an opportunity as an education opportunity. And also one approach I had before is we have this mutual agreement, and then student write a review. I write a review too, and then we exchange and see what's the difference there. And that could really benefit students a lot. So just to add on there. Thank you.
Great. Barret, anything to add?
No, those are really great points. I might just say from a big picture perspective again, so most of us do publicly funded research, so you can't really disentangle publishing from research. It's the same, it's embedded in the process. It's how we communicate in our field. And then the peer review system is obviously integral to peer review publications. And so this is the game or the rules that we play in our business. And it's important for students to understand those rules. And it's not, you know, just responding to reviewers, but also learning how to write reviews, because it's two sides of the same coin, or if you will, you know, it's like in baseball game in an inning where there's people batting and people pitching. And you have to be able to understand both sides and how that kind of game works and the rules that apply. And I don't want to sound too pragmatic, but I think it's important then as students that you learn how to review. And certainly I agree that starting at the senior PhD level is the right place if you're interested. And there's associate editors that you may know from conferences or from your network. And if they're in the same field as you, probably they're handling manuscripts that you could competently comment on. So you might want to reach out to them. Obviously, your supervisor is probably your first point of contact. And there's a lot of value in doing this in collaboration, I think, as I already mentioned, so you can learn a little bit more about the process. And I think it's important maybe to have your first review come to you before you write one, so you can understand how hard those comments can be to take before you start dishing them out.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that actually kind of folds into the next question. As scientists, we all kind of start at the base level and have to gain expertise as we go through. So can you provide some guidance for student reviewers who have self-doubt on being an actual expert in the fields? Are reviews from someone who considers himself a junior scientist still valuable if we can't necessarily comment on specific methods that we're unfamiliar with, for example? Barret, do you want to take this one to start?
Yeah, sure. It's a really good question. I think that students undersell what they know about their field. So chances are, so like in my lab, I have like 15 people by September, and other projects that are involved with my own team members. So I don't know as much about their projects as they do, what are all the individual subtopics that they do. They know more than I do, they should. And when it comes to papers, I think students are often way more up to speed on the other journal papers coming out in the last 2 to 3 years on that topic than say a professor would be or a senior scientist somewhere. So that's something of value you can add in terms of thinking whether the research is placed in the context of the very emerging field or the very recent work. I think that students are much better at data visualization than professors. I mean, the students that are being trained now kind of grow up on ggplot2 or matplotlib or these sort of Python or R tools. And so they can usually comment better on how to improve figures because they know what the capacity of those tools are. And with regards to the last part of the question, whether or not you're an expert or you can comment on the whole manuscript or part of it, that's just part of the game. And you just have to, again, I shouldn't use the word game, it's part of the system. You have to communicate that to the editor if you don't know a big part of the method. Say there's 3 different technical approaches that are used and you know 2 of them and not the third, you should just let the editor know that in your comment box. So there'll be a comment to the editor and a comment to the authors. And you can put those sort of comments to the editor and the authors won't see them. And that's really normal. So like, for example, I get papers often with analytical solutions in them, and those analytical solutions are applied in some field. So let's say someone came up with an analytical solution to study alpine groundwater surface water interactions or something. Chances are the people that do alpine groundwater surface water interactions in the field don't understand the math to comment on the solution development. They don't maybe understand integral transforms or whatever is used, but maybe you as a applied math expert do, or the other way around. You don't know the math, but you know the field application. So it's really common. Lots of papers have different aspects to them that only certain people can comment on certain parts of them. And you just have to communicate where your realm of expertise lies and where it stops.
Yeah, I would just add to that. That's I completely agree. And yeah, so keep in mind that you're sort of part of a team of reviewers. It's not just you. And it's the role of the associate editor to make sure that in cases where it's interdisciplinary or there are different aspects in the methods, to make sure that they find reviewers to represent all of those aspects. And so it's really helpful to the associate editor to hear from you. Even, definitely, I agree, write it in the box with your review, but also even in the initial process when you're being asked to review, it can be helpful to the editor if you say up front, yeah, this, I'm really interested in the alpine hydrology, but I'll just tell you up front that I won't be able to evaluate the math or something like that. And then the associate editor can say, okay, I definitely need to then go make sure I cover all the bases on this manuscript.
And that's why there's a reviewing team on that, right? I mean, I think that's the real concept of that. So let's think about me. Who is the real expert on that paper? Ideal case, it should be author, right? And all of us just trying to help them to make the paper polish, make it better. So it is really rare case you can find an expert can cover everything on that paper. If you have that person should write that paper, or this paper already been written. So don't feel hesitant, and just like the other 2 panelists told you there. And one more thing I want to add is, if your native language is not English, and you might feel hesitant, is my review, my English elegant enough on that? And so don't worry about that too much. Do your best, because we are not asking you to write an English essay for competition. You are doing this for greater good for the community, contribute your expertise on this. And then about this expert question, think about this. I mean, you are invited to be a reviewer. That means your expert is very close to this manuscript. If you don't understand it, how can the rest of the community who are even further distance from this paper can understand it, right? So you are kind of gatekeeper to help 2 things. One is, well, when I say you, I mean the reviewer. You are doing 2 things. One is to help this manuscript to be more readable to the broader audience on that, because you are close to this manuscript based on your expertise. And then second is you are also a gatekeeper. If you find a big flaw on that, if you don't find it, and the community who has further distance, they won't know it. So again, that's a two-way street on that, and that's what I want to emphasize. Thank you.
Thanks, Yu-Feng. So the final question on reviewing manuscripts that we received that we're going to cover today, just in the sake of time, is that there's been some debate about biases in the review process. Do you think there are approaches we should be taking to address this? And the one example that one of the questions that was submitted was, by instituting a double-blind peer review process. Yu-Feng, as an executive editor for Groundwater, has Groundwater considered this that you know of?
This has been in a discussion on many journals about this, and I can see this advantage, disadvantage on either way of this. And Groundwater, now we are still using the traditional way on that, and I don't think we are going that route. But I cannot speak for the whole community of this. And in my personal point of view, I prefer the traditional way because, again, just like when you put your signature on your review, and that's your credit, that's the work you have been doing, and also that's your opportunity, young scientists, to let people know your passion and your contribution. Why not of this, right? So again, I might be naive because I can see the reason people want to do double blind on this. And again, the author, if you know who are the authors, that also help the reviewer to know who did this work, and that help the communication to establish the collaboration in the future on this. And again, as I say, pretty soon you will realize this is a very small community. Even though you cover the name, the writing style, the work, you're going to know who did this, who wrote this, right? And the shadow behind the curtain, people can guess pretty well too. So what's the point of doing this? So I can see in a different field, they might have benefit, but in our field, I still don't think this will benefit us than other reason, other approach. And we are geoscientists, we are nice to everybody, and we are professional, right? So again, I mean, when we do things, okay, now serious, when we do things in a professional way and with a good intention, then I don't think this is necessary, okay? But there's an assumption there. Thank you.
Barret, Holly, do you have anything to add quickly before we transition to responding to reviewers?
Yeah, I know we're short on time, but I maybe would present, I completely see the arguments for keeping it the way it is, but I also see arguments for making things double blind, because like I was mentioning before when I was talking about, personal comments in reviews, I do think that there are biases. I think there are biases in terms of our fields, for interdisciplinary work. And I also think there are biases when it comes to, whether you're junior or senior, how established you are, potentially gender biases and things like that. And so double blind is one way to, and like you said, one problem is that, yeah, you can probably guess who it is, right? So that doesn't actually work. But the flip side of that is that sometimes maybe you don't. And so maybe that can help in some cases.
Yeah, I guess I agree with all those comments. I like the way it is now, so I can see the authors and think about how I would respond to them based on where they are in the field. So if it's a student, for example, and I can pick that up with a quick Google, I'm probably going to write my comments a little bit more kindly than if it was someone who's a really established researcher. Oftentimes I get sent manuscripts and I know the person really, really well, like they're like really good friend of mine. And even if I haven't published with them, I'd rather not be reviewing their work. And I wouldn't necessarily know that if it was a double blind review. And you do often know who someone is, not just on writing style, but the field site they're talking about, the model they choose to use, so many clues. But it does depend. Like if it's something on the really exact topic you work in where there's 20 other people in the field, then you probably know. But if it's more multidisciplinary, like Holly said, you probably wouldn't know. And so I'm happy to review for journals that do either approach, and I would happily submit to either journal. I don't feel strongly about it, but I don't and personally feel I've experienced a lot of bias, so maybe that's why I don't care too much. But I would obviously rather not perpetuate a system that there is bias in. So
Great, thanks. So that's the end of the first part on managing manuscripts, reviewing them. So we're going to transition over to how to respond to a review. Just a reminder to put questions into the Q&A form instead of the general chat. That way they pop up on my screen. I'm doing my best to triage them. If we don't answer them during this panel, Julie Masterman is going to talk about the CUAHSI Slack channel that we're going to start after this, where we can kind of go through and answer questions that weren't answered here. So just put your questions in the Q&A so that we can follow up after the seminar. So first question of responding to reviewers is similar to the first question in the first part. Can you start with Holly this time? Can you discuss your process when you receive reviews for one of your manuscripts? And small follow-up to that question is, which author handles answering the reviews, and do the co-authors play a role when you're responding?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, typically the process is to read through everything and try and figure out what, what's in the hard bin and what's in the easy bin. And the hard bin, I try to go for first. Do we have to run new simulations or collect new data or things like that? And a lot of times with those, you would probably want a lot of input from co-authors depending on what kind of paper it is. I think related questions that I've seen on the board are how do you respond if you disagree, right? And so it's totally legitimate to disagree and to write a strong response in a review. And so essentially I try to figure out which things are I want to argue against, and which things I think are important to address, and then sort out the easy things and the hard things to address. Typically for easy things, I would just go ahead and address them without the co-authors, and then, like I said, coordinate with them on the hard things, and then maybe put together the first set of response to reviewer comments, and then circulate that to the group. Or it depends a lot on the dynamics of the co-authors on the group. I've also seen it done other ways, where you can put it on Google Docs and everybody can sort of contribute, but it really depends on the dynamics, I think, of the group of authors who are on the paper.
Yeah, great point. Barry, do you have anything else to add to that?
Pretty much just restating what Holly said. Obviously, before you, if you're a student and you get reviewers' comments, you don't want to spend a month doing revisions before you talk it over with your authorship team. So, sending the reviewer comments to your team with maybe some annotations underneath whether or not you're going to make that change and how you think you can do it. Just make sure your authorship team's on the same page before you actually get into revising your manuscript. And if it's a postdoc that's the first author, probably they're going to lead revisions, whereas if it's a master's student, I may be more involved. So it all depends on who's on the paper.
So as a lead author, I guess I'm the next one. And so as a lead author, I think you also need to think about your role as the manager of this product. And as a manager, you have your team, and you already know their expertise. So early communication to your team is the golden rule for all the project. And so totally agree with Holly and Barret. You got to communicate with your team as early as possible on this, and then respect your team members' expertise. And that will really save you a lot of time on this. So that's the concept I hope the young scientists will remember. It's not just they are not help you for your paper. It's not your own paper. It is a team effort on that, and you are the manager of that. So don't forget that. And then on addressing the reviews, I really urge you to take a very close look, address all this. So think about this. If you didn't pay attention on this, it's going to back and forth a lot of time. And who suffer on that is the authors yourself on this. The other people just try to help you, but it's your product on this. You rather you do it yourself slowly, or you rather somebody do it for you, right? So that's the mindset I encourage all the young authors, young publishers to have is this is your thing. This is your paper. This is your team's paper. This is your team's product. And the more you do, the more you work on it, and there's less people interferes on the work you on that. So, question keep in mind: you rather editor or reviewer do it for you, or you rather do it yourself. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Yu-Feng. Next question is, similar to part one again. How do you guys prepare your students for responding to reviews? Because sometimes you can get reviews that are especially harsh or come across as harsh because you can't read into someone's emotion through a text, right? So how do you guys prepare your students for responding to reviewers? Yu-Feng, you want to start with this?
Sure. And I want to go back to my earlier comment is, keep in mind people, their reviewer, editor, there to help you. Nobody has no interest to really hammer you down or make you suffer on that. I would say most of the case, okay, most of the case, and it's really rare on that. And so if you keep that in mind, and you will find that when you're reading a review, you will feel you are learning on that, and learning of what? Not just the knowledge you miss, but also you will find a lot of review is just misunderstanding of it. So make your student understand it's not always you are wrong, because a lot of times students say, oh, people give me a credit, I must be doing something, I must do something wrong on that. Sometimes misunderstanding. And remember, those people are not the expert to understand every bit, 100% of your paper on that. But that's also their feedback. They could be wrong, and you guys think about why there's a miscommunication on that. Did I didn't use the best way to present this? That help you to shape your manuscript and be able to that broader audience to understand. The reason you want to put in the paper is because you want more people to understand your work instead of just your committee member, right? So keep that in mind. I think that will really help your mindset be more productive. Thank you.
Barret, do you have anything to add to that?
Sorry, my mouse froze there on me. I would say, yeah, those are all very solid points. If you get to the point where reviewers make comments on your paper and the editor's giving you a chance to modify your paper or revise it, then you're in, your best case scenario, you're in that sweet spot where you can actually resubmit and move closer to publication, hopefully. So it's actually a good news scenario, even though students become overwhelmed oftentimes when that happens. I remember I did an undergrad in structural engineering, and then within a year was doing a PhD in hydrogeology, and I just had no idea what I was doing. And it took me quite a few years to submit manuscripts. And then my first two were rejected. I was sort of overwhelmed with frustration. I thought, the reviewers didn't understand my genius or whatever. And then after I had a few months to think about it, I realized, no, those are really poorly written manuscripts, and the methods were poor, and the way I presented them was poor. So if you embrace reviewer comments as a way to improve not just your manuscript, but yourself as a scientist or a researcher more generally, then that's all part of the important process. I have started in my department a seminar series on these sort of topics, so I'm a little intentional in training not just my students, but other students in our department about this, because I don't think there is much of intentional training, at least in engineering, on these sorts of topics. It's always really baptism by fire, and I think we could be more intentional in our approach.
Great. Holly?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you. I think, I would just say that, yeah, I agree with Barret in, these comments are to help you, and these are experts that are, are working with you. But also sometimes you get, reviewer comments that are just off base. And so everybody's human, everybody has their own expertise, like what you said. So, as a student, I would say just, don't take it to heart too much, at least initially. Go talk to your advisor about it when you first get it back, and they may be able to give you kind of a broader perspective of whether, basically how much you should be worried about the various comments. And also, I agree with Yu-Feng that a lot of times it's just that maybe it wasn't as clearly written as you thought. And so it's all basically, it can be cleared up by just making things more clear. So.
Yeah, often I find like my manuscripts, they're so close to me that when I read through them again, I don't understand like why they didn't understand what I was trying to write. But then I read through the comment again, I'm like, oh yeah, that's not clear at all. So I understand why they're not picking up on this.
Tom, could I interject just quickly there? I think students need to be careful of not following in either ditch. So one extreme is that you're really defensive and self-righteous and think the editor or the reviewers are jerks and your work's perfect. You don't want to be like that where you can't accept criticism. And the other extreme is that you immediately think that you're fake and a fraud and your work's horrible and flawed. So you got to try to find the middle ground where you see value in what you've done, but see opportunities to improve it.
That's a great point. The next question, and some of the questions we've seen in the Q&A so far kind of fall into this category. How do you handle reviewers that either have opposing views about your work and suggest different avenues to correct an issue, or how do you respond to a reviewer that might be, suggesting you do something that's not necessarily within the scope of the paper, or a method that's not necessarily appropriate for your study area? How do you go about responding to those types of reviews or those types of comments? Holly, do you want to start with this one?
Sure, I sort of started talking about this before. Yeah, it's absolutely legitimate to disagree and to argue against particular review comments. Although, like Barret said, you don't want to argue against all of them. But if there are some, well, in the case that they're conflicting, that's kind of good because you just get to pick which way you want to go on it, and then go in that one and say I did that instead of the other thing. In the case that they're asking for something that's outside the scope, I mean, I think you need to consider, would doing that thing really improve my paper? Would not doing that thing really make my paper not that publishable? Because sometimes they're saying, well, without this thing, then it's not that big of a contribution, right? So there's a bit of a trade-off of, just saying that we decided not to do that because it's not in the scope, or being able to make a strong argument as to why the work that's in the scope of your paper is actually enough to make a strong contribution, and that could be a follow-on paper or something like that. So I think those kinds of comments are tricky, and you have to consider them carefully and kind of balance the effort that would be needed to do what they suggest versus how much you think it would improve your paper to do that thing, versus not doing it and trying to make a strong argument as to why it's not necessary.
Great. Yu-Feng?
Yeah, totally agree on what Holly said. And it's good. We are not in the era to debating the earth is flat or round, and you got to burn the other side of the people to fire on that. So the main reason we are not burning people because we believe on the science fact on that, right? So that goes to the serious part. Just state unbiased on your science fact on that. Okay, don't try to burn people to hell or emotional language on that. This is not the old time try to argue the earth is flat or wrong on that one. So keep it professional, and then, but we are all human beings. Sometimes there's a dispute on that. Don't forget, there's an editor there. That's editor's job. That's associate editor's job. That's executive editor's job. There to maintain that scientific mutual on that. Again, we are not here to set an arena and then for both sides go fight. No, that's not what we're doing here. We are trying to get people's wisdom together to benefit the community. So that's the only thing I want to add here.
I don't think I have anything to add other than I agree with those 2 points.
Thanks, Barret. So I think this is probably gonna be the final question as we're starting to run out of time. And kind of following up on one of the questions I just saw in the Q&A, kind of into this, is there a process for handling reviews that are unclear or necessarily you agree that you feel a review that you feel is like really unprofessional? And is it appropriate to like ask for clarification on a unclear review? And if so, who do you contact and what is that process like? Barry, you want to start with that one?
Sure. Yeah, there will be instances in your career if you stay in research where you'll get unprofessional reviews. Sometimes they're making good points, but in an unprofessional way. Sometimes they're just making points for the sake of it. And I guess you first of all have to realize the reviewer is not a dictator. Oftentimes reviewers will use terms like, I'll see these sentences, I am rejecting this paper because, well, the reviewer doesn't have the power to reject a paper. They're just suggesting. So reviewers aren't dictators or some supreme powers. You can disagree with the reviewer and push back if they're wrong. You shouldn't make your paper worse to please a reviewer. That doesn't make sense. That's sort of the opposite of the process. So where they're being unprofessional, you can just make sure you don't use the same inflammatory language, but you can push back and say, we disagree with this comment because, or we don't think this comment improves our manuscript, or we don't believe this, whatever. You can think of the wording in a kind way of pushing back. And if you're very unclear about a review, if the reviewer signed it, well, you should probably deal with the associate editor. Email the associate editor or the editor if you don't know who the associate editor is, which is the case in many journals, and ask for some clarification. The editor should be able to forward your comments to that reviewer and get back to you. I think you said a lot of things there, Tom. What else did you say?
Yeah, I kind of piled a bunch of questions together. I actually can't remember exactly what I said. This is good. Yeah,
I think that's good. I'll let the others speak maybe then. I think
answer everything. Ollie?
Yeah, so I think what Barret said is right. Just if it's a small comment and it's unclear, sometimes I'll just say, we think they meant this, and here's our answer. If it's a big thing that you really think needs to be addressed well, then I think it can be worth contacting the associate editor for either their take on what the reviewer meant, or if necessary, going back to the reviewer and asking for clarification. But yeah, otherwise I agree with Barret.
Great. Yu-Feng?
Yeah, so regarding unprofessional comments on that, and that's why sometimes in the process, there is a channel to send a private message to editor or associate editor. And that's something that the authors should consider. That could be the channel for you to express your frustration on such unprofessional behavior on that. So don't forget about using that channel for the author. And then unclear comments, I mean, it happens all the time. So one thing you can do as author, you can rephrase that comment in your reply. Say, this is how I think, what do you mean on that? And here's my answer of it. So stay on your understanding, and that helps the communication too. And a lot of time the manuscript got to go through the review 2 or 3 times, and it's kind of why 2 or 3 times, not just one time done, because it get narrow on the mutual agreement on that. So this is part of process of it. So just my experience to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Yu-Feng. It's about time to wrap this seminar up. I'd just like to thank the panelists for participating. This has been really great and fruitful discussion. Seeing some comments in the chat room about how much of a benefit this was for people that are participating. Just be on the lookout for future emails from CUAHSI and H3S for another seminar. It's going to be coming up at the end of the month of May. We haven't solidified the topic or panelist yet, but we're planning on doing these seminars once a month, last Friday of every month, kind of over lunch period or breakfast, depending on what part of the country you're in. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Julia Masterman so she can kind of convey some more stuff about CUAHSI or anything else that's upcoming on her end. Julia?
Thank you. I was double muted. Firstly, thank you so much to all of our AGU hosts and who helped organize this, hydrology section hosts who helped organize this series. I really appreciate everything you guys are working on and for this extremely helpful webinar. Throughout, I kind of noticed that this is relevant for more than just hydrology graduate students. I think this is a really valuable resource for so many graduate students and postdocs who are struggling with these questions. Thank you also to our panel for your participation and insights and for helping us create this resource.